Here's a saying in my unit back when we still had a unit. A dead soldier feels nothing. A living one carries it forever. I used to think that was just something old veterans said to feel important. I don't think that anymore. I'm the only one left from 3rd Perimeter Company, and some nights I wish I wasn't. My name doesn't matter much anymore, but I'll give it anyway. Avrek Dassin, HFY 2nd Brood, garrison trained, assigned to Occupation Zone 7 on a world the humans called Meridian's Rest. We had our own name for it. Doesn't matter now either. Nothing we named stuck. The humans took it all back, piece by piece, and by the end there was nothing of ours left to name. I want to tell you what happened there, not because it makes me look good. It doesn't. I want to tell you because I think somebody should know what it actually looked like, from our side, when the wrath came down. Meridian's Rest was supposed to be easy. That's what they told us in the briefing pods back on the carrier ships 3 years before any of this. A temperate world, low industrial output, a species barely a century into orbital flight. Command called it a soft acquisition. We were garrison troops, not frontline assault. Our job was occupation, administration, keeping the peace after the real fighting was done. I remember laughing about it with my bunkmate Tessu, back when Tessu was still alive to laugh with. We thought we'd drawn easy duty. Guard some silos, process some paperwork, maybe put down the occasional riot. Nothing worse than that. The city we were stationed in sat in a river valley, ringed by low green hills that turned gold in the autumn. Their autumn, not ours. We don't have seasons like that where I'm from. I remember standing on the garrison wall my first week there, watching the light change on those hills and thinking, quietly, that it was beautiful. I didn't say that to anyone. You didn't say things like that out loud in the HFY infantry. But I thought it. The humans didn't fight us in the open, not after the first month. Command told us that was because they were broken, pacified. I believed that for a while because it was easier than the alternative. The alternative was that they were waiting. The first sign something was wrong wasn't a battle. It was quieter than that. It was the market stalls. Every HFY garrison town had rules about human commerce, controlled trade, monitored goods, that kind of thing. And for the first 2 years, the humans mostly kept their heads down and did what they were told. Sold their bread, their vegetables, their strange fermented drinks that burned going down. Nodded at the patrols. Some of them even learned enough of our tongue to trade insults with the younger soldiers, the kind of insults that make everyone laugh because nobody really means them. Then slowly, over maybe 6 months, the market got quieter. Not empty, quieter. Fewer children running between stalls. Fewer old ones sitting outside their doors in the evening light. The humans still smiled at us, still bowed the way we trained them to, but something behind their eyes had changed, and none of us could name it. I remember mentioning it to my watch sergeant, a stiff old HFY named Vorn Aktai, and he told me I was imagining things. Said humans were simple creatures, easily controlled, and that I'd been reading too much into their faces. I wish I'd trusted my own eyes instead of his rank. Because what I was seeing, I understand now, was a species quietly saying goodbye to normal life. They weren't planning a riot. They were planning a war. And they were doing it so patiently, so completely under our notice, that by the time any of us understood what was happening, it was already far too late to stop it. It started on what the humans called the first frost of the year. I remember because Tessu complained about the cold that morning, said his blood wasn't built for a planet like this, and I told him to stop whining, that we'd be rotated home in 8 months anyway. He laughed. I remember his laugh. I think about it more than I'd like to. The attack didn't come as an army. That's the thing nobody back home understood when the reports started filtering back. There was no great human fleet, no thundering charge across open ground. It came as absence. Our eastern relay tower stopped transmitting at 3:40. We sent 2 soldiers to check it. They didn't report back. We sent 4 more, same thing. By dawn, half our perimeter sensors were dark, and nobody had seen a single human do anything. Vorn Acti finally took it seriously around first light, when the water reservoir feeding the garrison went bitter, and 3 of our medics realized, almost by accident, that it had been fouled 2 days earlier, and we simply hadn't noticed the taste change until it built up in our systems. 2 soldiers were already sick. It wasn't poison, not exactly. The humans were too clever for anything that obvious, something our own scanners would catch. It was something slower. Something that just made us weak, made our reflexes lag, made the whole garrison feel like it was moving through mud, right when it mattered most. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a riot. This wasn't even really a war, not the kind we trained for. This was a species that had spent 3 years learning exactly how we worked, exactly where we were vulnerable, and had waited, with a patience that still, to this day, makes something cold move through my chest, until they had every advantage stacked in their favor before they moved even one visible piece. The attack on the garrison proper came that night. I won't pretend I remember it in perfect order. Nobody who's been in something like that does, no matter what they tell you afterward. I remember the alarms. I remember Vorn Acti's voice cracking, actually cracking over the comm. I'd never heard that sound from him before, not once in 3 years. I remember Tessu grabbing his rifle and grinning at me like this was still something we could handle, like it was still just another patrol. I remember the south gate going down without a single explosion. They hadn't blown it. They'd simply, quietly over weeks, replaced enough of the load-bearing alloy with something weaker, something that looked identical to our maintenance scanners but crumbled under a fraction of the pressure it should have held. When the first ram hit it, it folded like wet paper. And then they were inside. I want to be honest about what I saw, because I think dishonesty about this is its own kind of cowardice. The humans who came through that gate were not the soft, browbeaten workers I'd watched in the market for 3 years. They moved like something that had been coiled for a long, long time and had finally been allowed to unwind. They weren't screaming. That's what stayed with me most. In every training scenario, every simulation, the attacking species screams, roars, announces itself. These humans were almost silent. You'd hear boots, you'd hear breath, and then you'd hear whatever happened next, and it was always fast and it was always final. I saw a young soldier, barely out of training, try to surrender near the armory. He dropped his weapon, raised his hands, said the human word for mercy that we'd all been taught in case of exactly this situation. The human facing him, an older man, gray at the temples, with a scar through one eyebrow, looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that I thought, God help me, I thought it might actually work. Then the man said something quiet, something I didn't understand at the time and only learned much later, from a human who told me what those words meant. He said, "Tell that to the ones you buried in the eastern quarry." And then he didn't take the surrender. I'm not telling you this to make the humans out to be monsters. I need you to understand that. I'm telling you this because it's what happened, and because, I found out afterward, we deserved a great deal of what came for us that night, in ways I hadn't let myself think about while we were the ones holding the guns. Here is the part I've turned over in my mind more than any other, more than the noise, more than the smell of the garrison burning, more than Tessu's face when I found him afterward. I survived because I hid. Not bravely, not tactically. I found a maintenance crawlspace beneath the West Barracks, the kind meant for repairing coolant lines, barely wide enough for a HFY to fit through on our stomachs, and I went in, and I stayed there while my company died around me. I heard it happen. I heard Vorn Acti's voice go silent partway through a sentence. I heard things I won't describe to you because I don't think you need to carry them the way I do. I lay in that crawlspace with my hands over my breathing slits, terrified that the sound of my own fear would give me away, for 6 hours, until the fighting stopped and the garrison belonged to someone else. When I finally came out, the sun had that pale, ash-colored quality it gets after a fire has burned all night. The garrison wasn't smoking anymore. It was just quiet. in the way a place is quiet after everything in it has already happened. A human found me, young, maybe 20, 25 in their years. She wasn't part of the assault force. I learned that later, that she was one of the ones who came after to help sort through what remained. She had a rifle, but she didn't raise it right away. She just looked at me, this half-starved, shaking alien soldier crawling out of a coolant duct, and something crossed her face that I still can't fully name. Not hatred, though I would have understood hatred. Not triumph either. It was closer to tired disappointment, like she'd hoped somehow that there'd be nobody left to find. She didn't kill me. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters more than anything else I could tell you about that morning. She could have. Nobody would have known. Nobody would have questioned it. Instead, she said something into her comm, and 20 minutes later I was being marched, hands bound, through the wreckage of everything I'd spent 3 years pretending was permanent. That was when I saw the rest of it, what they'd actually done. Not just to the garrison, to themselves, to get to that point. There were makeshift graves along the tree line outside the walls, dozens of them, dug over what must have been months, holding the bodies of humans who died slowly enough and quietly enough that we in the garrison had never once noticed the pattern. Workers who'd sickened and vanished. Families who'd simply stopped appearing in the census records and whose absence nobody in our administration had ever bothered to investigate. I asked the young woman, later, once I'd learned enough of the language to ask properly, why they'd waited so long. 3 years is a long time to live under an occupier while quietly building the means to destroy them. She told me it wasn't really about waiting. It was about making sure that when they finally moved, they wouldn't have to do it twice. I was not executed. I think that surprised me more than almost anything else that happened. I expected it, honestly hoped for it some days in the weeks that followed, because survival without purpose felt like its own kind of punishment. Instead, I was kept, along with a handful of others, garrison clerks, a few medics, soldiers like me who'd been found rather than fought, as something between a prisoner and a witness. They wanted us alive, I came to understand, not out of mercy exactly, but because a dead enemy can't tell the rest of the galaxy what happened here. A living one can. And humans, I learned, care a great deal about being understood correctly. I spent the better part of a year in a holding compound on the outskirts of the same city I'd once watched from the garrison wall, admiring the color of the hills. From there, I watched them rebuild, watched families return to the market square, watched a species that had been quiet and careful for 3 years become, almost overnight, loud again, children shouting, old men arguing over prices, music in the evenings that I didn't understand but that stayed in my head anyway. The young woman who'd found me, her name was Rhea, I learned eventually, came to talk with me sometimes. Not out of friendship. I don't think either of us would have called it that. I think she came because she was trying to understand something too, some shape of the war that didn't fit neatly into victory or grief, and talking to me was the closest she could get to asking the occupier directly. Was it worth what it cost you to become the kind of people who could do that to us? I told her the truth, the only time she asked me straight out. I told her that in 3 years, I had never once seen my command treat her people as anything other than a resource to be managed. I told her about Vorn Acti calling them simple. I told her about the quotas, the confiscations, the small daily humiliations that never made it into any official report because nobody thought they mattered enough to record. She listened to all of it without much expression. Then she said something I still think about. She said, "We didn't do this because we hated you. We did it because we understood, better than you ever did, exactly what it costs a person to survive on their knees. We decided it would cost less to stand up, even if standing up cost everything." I didn't have an answer for that. I still don't. I was released, eventually, as part of the broader terms when the HFY High Command finally accepted what half the sector already knew, that Meridian's rest was lost, and that no force we could send would take it back without losing more than the world was worth. I was put on a transport with the other survivors, sent home to a species that didn't quite know what to do with soldiers who'd come back from a battle we hadn't technically fought. Home didn't feel like home anymore. That's the part nobody warns you about. You expect the horror to fade once you're away from where it happened. It doesn't. It just changes shape. I'd walk through the streets of my birth city, safe, unthreatened, surrounded by my own kind, and I'd still hear that silence, the silence of humans moving through the dark, coiled and patient, ready to become something none of us had bothered to imagine they could be. People ask me sometimes whether I regret surviving. It's not a simple question, and I don't think it has a simple answer. I regret hiding while my company died. I regret every year I spent before that, treating an entire species as something smaller than what they were. I regret that it took losing everything for me to actually see them clearly. But I don't regret being alive to say this to whoever's listening. We mistook their patience for weakness, their silence for surrender, and their mercy, because in the end, that's what letting me live was, whatever else it looked like, for something less than what it actually was. They didn't destroy us because they were monsters. They destroyed us because we gave them every reason to over 3 long years, one small cruelty at a time, and then we were foolish enough to be surprised when the bill finally came due. I survived humanity's wrath. I think about that phrase sometimes, turn it over the way you'd turn over a stone to see what's underneath. Wrath makes it sound like fire, like something wild and unthinking. It wasn't that. It was the most controlled, most patient, most devastatingly deliberate thing I have ever witnessed in my life. And if you ever find yourself standing where I stood, looking out over some quiet world you think you understand, some people you've decided are simple enough to manage, I hope you remember what I'm telling you now. Some silences aren't surrender. Some of them are just a species deciding, very carefully, exactly how much of you they're willing to forgive.